That night, she did not wake up missing a memory. She woke up missing an entire life. And somewhere in the same city, the man who once held her vows in his hand stood silent, forced to watch the woman he loved look at him like a stranger. He could tell her the truth in one breath, but the truth might destroy her all over again. What happens when the cruelest heartbreak is not betrayal, but being loved by someone your soul remembers while your mind does not? Stay with this story because beneath the soft rain, the quiet piano, and the trembling touch lies a devastating question. Can love survive when memory dies first?
The subject, Olivia, regained awareness through a disorienting sequence of sensory inputs. A pervasive sense of cognitive dissonance manifested, an unidentifiable yet profound error in her perception of reality as she surveyed her familiar apartment. Her environment presented no immediate incongruities. Professional equipment was in its expected location, yet a somatic marker of distress persisted, suggesting a significant memory lacuna. This dissociation intensified upon viewing her reflection, which she perceived as alien, and an unremembered contusion on her forearm. The absence of any recollection for the injuries prompted a process of confabulation where she constructed a plausible scenario of accidental self-harm. This fabricated narrative served to pacify her conscious mind, despite a persistent subconscious rejection of the explanation. An incoming communication from her mother interrupted her routine. The mother's vocal inflections betrayed significant anxiety, thinly veiled by questions about the subject's health. Olivia responded with normative denial, while the mother's replies indicated a forced, unconvincing reassurance. The conversation pivoted to a prescribed supplement from a Dr. Reynolds, a name Olivia did not recognize. A search produced a bottle for post-viral immune support, an artifact supporting a fabricated medical history. The subject's verbal compliance suggests a baseline of trust in familial authority. The mother reinforced the false narrative, linking the supplements to recovery from a supposed virus. The subject's temporal disorientation became apparent as she struggled to recall this illness. Despite the cognitive dissonance, she outwardly accepted the explanation. The interaction produced a state of unarticulated disquiet. While observing the familiar cityscape, she experienced pronounced derealization, perceiving herself as detached from the life around her. Her upcoming professional engagement, a gallery exhibition, served as a cognitive diversion. A gallery contact Megan reinforced the narrative of her recent absence, using language designed to normalize the memory gap. This dissociation extended to her own artistic creations. She clinically assessed her photographs' merits but lacked the autobiographical memory of their creation. Despite the mnemonic void, the subject performed her professional role at the gallery opening, operating on learned behaviors. This period of procedural functioning was suddenly disrupted by a shift in her perceptual field, a single point of intense focus. She registered a focused, intense gaze, qualitatively different from the ambient scrutiny of the other attendees. The source was a male individual, Giovanni, whose attire suggested bespoke tailoring. As if detecting her awareness, the individual established direct eye contact. Upon mutual eye contact, the subject experienced a perceptual narrowing, where ambient sounds and peripheral figures receded. Her cognitive focus fixated on Giovanni, whose expression was interpreted as a complex amalgam of suffering and optimism, a projection rooted in a suppressed emotional bond. The subject exhibited a significant somatic response, including acute tachycardia. Giovanni then closed the distance between them with a measured, deliberate gait. His initial vocalization was a professional compliment, to which Olivia responded with a facade of composure. When he inquired about a previous meeting, her denial was immediate and sharp, a reflexive negation of a surfacing implicit memory. She then attempted to rationalize the feeling of familiarity. A micro-expression of tension in Giovanni preceded his deflective response. Closer proximity revealed a healed scar on his neck, a detail that captured her attention. He introduced himself as Giovanni and initiated a handshake. This physical contact induced an intense neurological sensation, which she described as an electric shock, prompting an audible gasp. Giovanni maintained the grip, his thumb strategically placed on her pulse point as he assessed her reaction with near desperation. Olivia rationalized the sensation as static discharge. He corrected her framing of the moment as unexpected rather than weird, validating its significance. His name, Giovanni, resonated within her memory as a familiar but unplaceable echo. This created a paradox. The certainty of no prior meeting coexisted with the profound impact of his gaze, an intense, focused attention designed to isolate its subject. Giovanni decreased the interpersonal distance, introducing olfactory cues into the sensory mix. He then proposed a meeting in a more private setting, using a professional pretext to legitimize the request. The subject's executive functions registered this as a potentially dangerous proposition. Despite her rational misgivings, she agreed, her decision governed by the profound psychophysiological effect he had on her. Her assent prompted a visible and unguarded display of relief from Giovanni, a brief but significant breach of his controlled persona, which was rapidly reinstated. They proceeded to a nearby cafe, a move that isolated her from the public gallery space. Giovanni employed subtle, proprietary gestures to guide her. At a corner table, he initiated a conversation focused on her work, a topic that maintained a professional pretext. His questions indicated meticulous prior research, a grooming tactic designed to establish credibility. This superficial dialogue, however, failed to mask a palpable underlying tension. Even minimal accidental physical contact reliably triggered the subject's acute neurological response. When prompted about his business, Giovanni offered a deliberately ambiguous description of international trade. The vagueness of his reply led the subject to correctly intuit that the professional pretext was a fabrication concealing his true motive. The subject impulsively voiced her central conflict, directly questioning their connection. Giovanni responded with a manipulative reframing that invoked transcendentalism to sidestep a factual answer. Further inquiry was prevented by a strategically timed phone call from her mother. Giovanni's remark about family revealed an unsettling prescience. During the subsequent call, the mother's manifest anxiety and her focus on the vitamin regimen confirmed the call's function was to reinforce the pharmacological controls placed upon the subject. The mother's specific questions regarding dizziness and confusion were diagnostic, aimed at assessing potential failures in the memory suppression. Olivia's direct confrontation of this behavior was deflected with a claim of maternal hypervigilance, a form of gaslighting. Upon her return, Giovanni controlled the encounter's conclusion. He provided a business card, leaving the onus of re-engagement on her. His final statement was a calculated challenge, reframing her cognitive dissonance as an opportunity for a non-rational choice before abruptly leaving. His confident gait projected an air of absolute entitlement. The subject focused on his full name, Giovanni Moretti, on the card. The name, while consciously unrecognized, triggered an emotional response consistent with deep-seated memory and loss. After a 3-day interval marked by obsessive rumination, the subject yielded to compulsion and initiated contact. The decision was emotional, not rational. His immediate answer and the specific way he vocalized her name triggered a significant visceral reaction, confirming his psychological conditioning. The subject anticipated professional contact regarding the work. An unspoken tension filled the subsequent pause. He proposed a dinner meeting to discuss terms. She acknowledged her lapse in judgment, agreeing despite misgivings. Yes. Her acquiescence preceded any logical assessment. The chosen venue was discreet, a location previously unnoticed by the subject. Its ambiance suggested an exclusivity requiring advanced booking. However, upon hearing the name Moretti, the host's manner shifted to complete deference. Mr. Moretti, your usual table is ready. They were escorted to a strategic corner booth that afforded privacy and surveillance of the entry. Unsolicited wine was served with notable reverence. You come here often? She inquired. I've been a patron for years. Giovanni inhabited the space with proprietary ease. The proprietor is a long-standing associate. The discourse was fluid. His inquiries were not superficial, but showed a deep analysis of her artistic process, suggesting extensive prior research. You mentioned urban landscapes, he noted, inclining toward her. Yet your collection contains multiple storm images, precipitation, cumulonimbus formations. The reason? Her affinity for rain was an automatic confession and appeal to its transformative effect. His demeanor altered. A wave of profound relief was observed on his face. It was as if she had resolved an urgent, unasked question. What was that? She challenged. What? That expression? As if my response was precisely what you required. Giovanni's jaw tensed. Perhaps it was. You are repeating the pattern, the cryptic replies. I apologize. His hand moved across the table, hovering near hers without making contact. Certain matters are difficult to verbalize. Before she could pursue it, unsolicited appetizers arrived. Giovanni had perfectly predicted her culinary choices, including an aversion to olives. Lucky guess, she inquired with intent. Observant, he stated, his hand finally enveloping hers. The psychosomatic jolt recurred. The sensation was more potent. You are quite transparent. This contradicted her self-perception as a guarded individual whom others found inscrutable. Yet Giovanni interpreted her reactions with the familiarity that suggested long-term observation. The dinner extended for hours over varied discourse. He intermittently used Italian, causing a physiological response in the subject despite her incomprehension. His translations were benign, incongruous with the intensity in his gaze. Describe your family, he requested during the final course. Parents in the suburbs, an older sibling, Lauren, a standard dynamic. You are close with them. Yes, though the mother has recently become, she paused, overprotective, making odd inquiries about her health. Perhaps she has cause for concern. The meaning? His study of her was prolonged. It is nothing. Maternal anxiety is universal. Yet his tone implied withheld information. They departed near midnight. Giovanni insisted on escorting her home. The city soundscape was muted. Their steps echoed. He kept a calculated distance, proximal enough for protection, distal enough for propriety. May I see you again? He asked at her residence. The pretext of business was dropped. No. His candor on this point was noted. What is the objective? To understand you. His hand rose, tracing her jaw with a deliberate, gentle touch. If you permit it. The subject failed to demand clarification on his incongruous familiarity or the deference he commanded. Instead, she gave nonverbal consent. He departed without further physical contact, yet the tactile sensation persisted on her skin long after his exit. The following day, an anonymous floral delivery of 24 white roses arrived. The sender was correctly identified. When she called to acknowledge the gift, his response was immediate. There is an art exhibit opening tonight. Come with me, Olivia. Please. This final entreaty, laden with desperation, dismantled her defenses. Subsequently, time perception became distorted for the subject. Giovanni's presence in her life escalated under a consistent pretext of politeness. He appeared at her workspace, post-meetings, and on her route home, a pattern of coincidences that strained credulity. The subject disclosed this to her mother during a routine call. There is this man, she began. A man, the mother's vocal pitch elevated. Provide all details. She depicted Giovanni's intensity in his focused gaze. What is his name? The mother inquired. Giovanni Moretti. A silence. That is wonderful, honey. I am so happy for you. You have not met him. I am sure he is. I trust your judgment. When is an introduction possible? The mother's zeal seemed performative and disingenuous. Maybe soon, she responded cautiously. Good. That is good. Your father and I would love that. And Olivia, are you still taking those vitamins, doctor? The subject confirmed adherence to Dr. Reynolds's protocol, yet questioned the medication's necessity. The mother figure deflected with a fabricated viral illness, a classic gaslighting maneuver. Control was reinforced by the unannounced arrival of an associate, Megan. The associate arrived with placating gifts, displaying poorly concealed anxiety. She relayed a call from the mother regarding a new male acquaintance. The mother's atypical excitement was a clear indicator of a coordinated psychological priming effort by the family unit. Everything has been anomalous recently. How are you feeling? Megan leaned forward. Any cephalalgia, vertigo, or disorientation? Why is this a constant line of questioning? It stems from concern. But her gaze averted. Are you taking the vitamins? Jesus Christ, Megan. What is the fixation with these vitamins? They are important. Dr. Reynolds was very specific about. I have no memory of consulting Dr. Reynolds. The friend exhibited a visible startled response. You were quite ill. It is natural for memory gaps to occur. Is it? The subject began pacing, verbalizing her total amnesia regarding any sickness. And now a man regards her with familiarity while her social circle behaves erratically. She reports a persistent feeling that vital information is missing. Megan also rose, reaching for her hands. You are overthinking. The virus likely caused this disequilibrium. Give it time. Yet she avoided eye contact during this reassurance. The sister Lauren later canceled dinner, citing a work emergency. I am so sorry. This is uncharacteristic. I know the situation is currently complicated. Her vocal tone was tense. But I am glad you are seeing someone. Mother informed me about Giovanni. Of course she did. She said he sounds nice. She has never met him. Well, when she does, I am certain it will be fine. The feigned nonchalance caused a visceral negative reaction. Giovanni arranged another dinner 2 nights later, a new venue with the same obsequious staff. On this occasion, she observed other patrons' reactions to him, a mixture of deference and apprehension, suggesting a powerful, feared individual. Who are you truly? She questioned over wine. A proprietor of an import company. People do not react to import businessmen as if they are dangerous. His expression became deliberately blank. Perhaps I have an imposing presence. That is an evasion. It is the one I can provide you now. He took her hand across the table. Can that suffice? For the moment. The subject again recognized a lapse in judgment, failing to demand truth. His pleading gaze overrode her internal alarms, compelling her to acquiesce with a nod. The subject admitted an unwillingness to disengage. The attraction between them superseded logic, fear, and the certainty of widespread deception regarding something she needed to know. In the 14 days post-initial contact, Giovanni integrated into her routine with a seamlessness that defied its invasive nature. His contact was constant, morning texts and unsolicited flowers. He demonstrated an anticipatory awareness of her needs, like appearing with an umbrella for unpredicted rain she had not foreseen. This is moving fast, she commented one evening during a lakeside walk. The water mirrored the urban luminescence, creating patterns on its dark surface. Is it? He responded, his hand interlacing with hers with practiced familiarity. Time is subjective. That is not an answer. Would you prefer I decelerate? He halted their progress to confront her directly. Because I am able, if that is your need. The subject's true need was a logical explanation for the overwhelming bond. Instead, she shook her head. No, do not slow down. Relief transformed his features. He drew her closer, forehead resting against hers. Good, because I do not think I could. The subsequent kiss suspended all rational thought. His kiss was an exercise in controlled appetite, a calculated starvation designed not to devour its subject too quickly. When contact ceased, a state of vertigo ensued. Vittorio then initiated a series of curated environmental immersions, beginning with a botanical garden where his special access reinforced his elevated status. We navigated hothouses containing orchids and other tropical flora, the humid atmosphere clinging to my skin. He recited the nomenclature of exotic flowers with an unnerving casual authority. How do you know all this? I inquired, touching a crimson petal. I pay attention to beauty. His gaze remained fixed on my face during the statement. The next exhibit, a rooftop restaurant I had previously documented but could not afford. It was an exclusive space. The host, however, acknowledged Vittorio by name, escorting us to a prime table with a panoramic city view. Chicago appeared below us, a spill of jewels. This view, I murmured, my mind already framing the image. It's better during storms, Vittorio noted, sipping his wine, his focus on me, not the vista. The lightning makes the city appear alive, dangerous, and beautiful all at once. This specific phrasing induced a powerful sense of déjà vu, compelling me to grip the table. I had an unshakable certainty of a prior occurrence. I had occupied this exact position, observing storm fronts moving over Lake Michigan, rain impacting the barriers. Are you all right? Vittorio's hand immediately covered mine. Have I been here with you before? His jaw muscle clenched. Why would you believe that? I don't know, I faltered, unable to process the feeling. Familiar, he supplied in a low tone. Yes. His assessment of me was prolonged. Perhaps some locations resonate with certain individuals, striking chords we can't comprehend. The delivery, however, implied his own perfect comprehension. Later, at my apartment, I noted further environmental anomalies. High-grade camera lenses I had not procured were now housed on my equipment shelf. A collection of books on Italian architecture now occupied a previously empty space. A designer jacket, tags intact, hung in my closet. The size and style were a perfect match. I contacted Megan. Did you place items in my apartment? What? No, for what reason? There is equipment here I have no memory of acquiring. Expensive equipment. A significant pause followed. Perhaps you're forgetting minor acquisitions. That virus was hard on you. Megan, a $3,000 lens isn't a minor acquisition. Are you taking your vitamins? She deflected, employing standard inquiry. Dr. Reynolds mentioned recovery can be impacted by inconsistent treatment. I felt an urge to vocalize extreme frustration. Yes, I am taking them. Good. That's very good. The memories of the purchases may return as the supplements work. This hypothesis failed to account for the tagged jacket or the unordered books, lacking any shipment history. My mother called 3 days later during my lunch break. Honey, your father and I were discussing it. Why not bring Giovanni to dinner this weekend? We are eager to meet him. You've never shown this level of enthusiasm for my previous partners. That is inaccurate. We are always pleased when you are happy. Her tone was one of forced cheerfulness. And you sound so happy when you discuss him. I rarely discuss him. You reference him in every conversation. She paused. Which is wonderful. We simply wish to become acquainted with him. Is that so unusual? It was. Their entire reaction was anomalous, yet I consented. The decision was twofold: to observe their interaction with Vittorio, and because refusal felt like it would validate suspicions I could not yet articulate. Vittorio collected me on Saturday evening for the drive to my parents' suburban residence. He was dressed in dark trousers and a burgundy shirt, the open collar displaying his customary gold chain. His casual presentation was likely more costly than my monthly rent. Nervous, I questioned as we entered the highway. Should I be? Most individuals are nervous when meeting parents. I am not most individuals, he countered, glancing at me while his hand moved from the wheel to my thigh. And I anticipate your parents will be gracious. The specific word choice was unsettling, not welcoming. Gracious, as if he expected a performance. My mother was radiating tension when she opened the door. Giovanni, it is so wonderful to finally meet you. Please come in. Robert, they have arrived. My father appeared from the living room, extending a hand that Vittorio took with polished professionalism. Mr. Parker, I appreciate the invitation to your home. Please call me Robert. My father's scrutiny of Vittorio was intense, almost clinical. Olivia mentioned your work in import-export and other ventures. They engaged in a discussion of business and global economics. I assisted my mother in the kitchen, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she plated appetizers. Are you all right? I asked softly. Fine. I just want everything to be flawless. She produced a strained smile. He seems pleasant, very refined. Mom, what is happening? Your behavior is abnormal. My behavior is not abnormal. I am a mother meeting her daughter's new partner, she stated, but her gaze would not meet mine. Dinner proceeded with an indefinable undercurrent. Vittorio charmed my parents with practiced skill, inquiring about their lives and sharing anecdotes of his supposedly deceased family in Italy. The perpetrator, Giovanni, utilized a fabricated history to elicit an empathetic response. The subject noted the accelerated intimacy as an anomaly, questioning the rapid formation of a familial bond. A private meeting with the father figure suggested a transactional arrangement. The subject probed the mother's acceptance of Giovanni. The maternal figure offered rote justifications, her movements becoming mechanical under questioning. When pressed, she defaulted to intuition, a standard tactic to shut down inquiry. That is not a sufficient explanation, Olivia. She turned to face me directly. Sometimes one must trust that others are acting for the best, even without understanding all the variables. What does that signify? It signifies that Giovanni is beneficial for you. And that is the critical point. Before I could press the issue, the men reemerged. Giovanni expressed his gratitude to my parents with what appeared to be genuine warmth and promised a future visit. The return drive was silent as I processed the evening's atypical dynamics. They liked you, I eventually stated. I am glad, he said, taking my hand. Their approval is meaningful to me. Why? You have no prior knowledge of them? Nor of me, correct? His thumb made concentric circles on my palm. Certain connections exist outside of linear time. You continue to make such cryptic statements. I am aware. He raised my hand, kissing the knuckles. My apologies. Some truths are difficult to verbalize. Attempt it. He parked the vehicle outside my building but retained his grip. What if I posit that every moment with you feels like a return home? That my knowledge of your preferences stems from intense observation? that your every mannerism is cataloged in my memory because you are the central focus of my world. My heart rate accelerated. That is impossible. Our acquaintance spans 2 weeks. Is it impossible? His other hand cupped my cheek. Or merely improbable? Olivia, I am not requesting comprehension, only trust. He kissed me gently. Can you provide that? I should have refused, demanded empirical data instead of poetic deflections. Yet observing the vulnerability within his intense gaze, I found myself acquiescing. Okay, I whispered. The subsequent kiss was deeper. For that interval, the questions receded. The data inconsistencies became irrelevant. Only the present contact mattered. Only him. This despite every instinct signaling a critical omission of fact. 3 weeks post-initiation, Vittorio invited me to a formal dinner with business associates. The venue was a downtown establishment I had photographed but never accessed. We were in a private room with low lighting, an atmosphere that induced a physiological sense of unease. Are you certain about this? I asked at the vehicle, adjusting the emerald dress Vittorio had sent me with the note. Only for tonight. It was predictably a perfect fit. I want them to meet you. His hand on my knee was a warm pressure through the silk. You are important to me. They need to understand that. The room contained approximately 15 men, all senior to Vittorio, all observing our entrance with a uniform, evaluative gaze. The atmosphere was predatory. A man with silvered hair approached. Giovanni. Their embrace suggested a long-standing alliance. And this must be Olivia, Giovanni said. Franco Bellini, my oldest friend and most trusted advisor. Franco's handshake was firm, his visual assessment of me brief but intense, making me want to retreat. Giovanni speaks of you incessantly. It is a pleasure. The subject observed her companion's expression, interpreting it not as pleasure, but as calculation, or perhaps concern. During the extended meal, physical contact was initiated by the male, a recurring gesture of control. The conversation, ostensibly about commerce, was perceived by the subject as containing subtextual cues, a coded vernacular she could not fully decipher. An associate's inquiry regarding the subject's profession was followed by a toast. The possessive pronoun, used in reference to her companion, our Giovanni, triggered a visceral anxiety response in the subject. This suggests a perceived threat to her autonomy and an awareness of the companion's enmeshment with this powerful, possessive collective. The subject reported intense scrutiny from an individual identified as Franco, describing it as evaluative rather than hostile. This surveillance was punctuated by a nonverbal exchange with her companion, a glance the subject registered as significant but could not decode, amplifying her feelings of disorientation before another associate initiated direct contact. An associate's verbal misstep, inquiring how she was settling back into before a clumsy correction, served as a significant cognitive disruptor. The implication of a prior history contradicted her memory, yet she responded with a facade of normalcy, a common defense mechanism when faced with jarring inconsistencies. In response, the companion's grip tightened, a nonverbal sign of distress. A fleeting, uncontrolled emotional expression was observed before his composure was restored. Following a silent drive, the subject issued a directive for him to enter her residence, to which he responded with a period of calculated hesitation and observation. After seeking confirmation, the male entered the subject's apartment. His movements were noted by the subject as familiar, akin to reacquainting himself with a known environment. This culminated in an urgent physical embrace, during which he demanded verbal affirmation of the situation's reality to secure emotional validation. The subject provided the requested affirmation, initiating physical intimacy. Her physiological response was marked by a profound dissonance, a conscious sense of novelty clashing with a somatic experience of deep familiarity. This muscle memory suggests a pre-existing physical bond that bypasses the subject's current cognitive state. The companion uttered foreign phrases which, though unintelligible, elicited a strong psychosomatic reaction and a sense of recognition. Following the encounter, the subject exhibited hypervigilance, unable to rest. She disengaged from the sleeping male to initiate a search, driven by unresolved suspicion. Compulsively violating her companion's privacy, the subject searched his jacket. The discovery of approximately 12 photographs depicting herself with the male in committed scenarios, including wearing rings, served as the primary catalyst for her psychological crisis. The images presented a direct contradiction to her known memories. The evidence included images in unfamiliar settings. The most potent artifact was a professional wedding portrait depicting the subject and her companion, which induced an acute stress response. The image provided a powerful representation of the profound memory gap she was experiencing. A secondary piece of evidence, an invoice for custom archival framing, 16 by 20, rush order, was also discovered. This detail, though seemingly minor, suggested a deliberate, ongoing effort to curate and display this unknown history, deepening the subject's sense of being manipulated. The subject's internal conflict manifested audibly just as the companion appeared. His physiological response, a visible loss of facial color upon seeing the evidence, served as a nonverbal confession. The subject confronted him, her voice constricted by duress, presenting the photographs of an unremembered marriage. The subject reiterated her distress over the absent memory. The male approached cautiously, employing placating gestures. His defense, a semantic distinction between lying and omission, was rejected by the subject, who then cast the photographic evidence aside in a physical display of rejection. Her distress escalated into an identity crisis, articulated through existential questions. His attempt to pacify her was met with immediate hostility. The subject exhibited signs of being cognitively overwhelmed, to which he responded with a display of empathy, claiming valid reasons for the deception. The male's use of the pronoun we indicated a wider conspiracy, escalating the subject's paranoia. She physically rebuffed his attempt at contact, precipitating his display of pain. When pressed, he hesitated before invoking the authority of doctors to justify his actions of protection. The male, appearing broken, revealed his objective was to help you remember. This disclosure acted as a severe psychological blow, causing a physical collapse. The subject then correctly diagnosed her own condition as amnesia, which he confirmed was the result of an accident. He provided a timeline, a 2-year memory loss following an incident 6 weeks prior. This allowed the subject to recontextualize recent oddities: medication, her mother's behavior, her friends' monitoring, as part of an orchestrated deception. The realization of collusion by her entire social network induced a state of profound betrayal. The subject accused him of choosing reseduction over disclosure. He defended this as medically advised, arguing a natural recreation of their bond was safer. This justification triggered a hysterical, broken laugh from the subject, who equated his method with inducing insanity. The male adopted a posture of supplication, justifying his actions as a measure to prevent losing her. The subject responded by ordering him to leave. Before departing, he made a final declaration of love, attempting to frame the emotional core of their manufactured experience as authentic. The subject was left in a state of profound disorientation, questioning her ability to discern reality. She remained surrounded by artifacts of her forgotten life, with a man revealed to be her husband. The next phase was initiated by an incoming call from her friend Megan. Perceiving the call's timing as suspiciously opportune, The subject immediately confronted her friend, whose complicity was confirmed from the beginning post-hospitalization. The subject angrily dismissed the repeated justifications involving medical advice, focusing instead on the weeks of sustained deceit. Her friend reiterated the flawed rationale of protection through deception to allow love to recur naturally. Rejecting this premise, the subject terminated communication and began self-imposed isolation, confronting a worldview now fragmented beyond immediate repair while surrounded by his lingering scent. Following a 3-day period of dissociation, the subject initiated a systematic investigation of her life as if it were a foreign case. An inquiry into her finances revealed anomalous transactions, unrecognized deposits, and, critically, joint accounts with Giovanni Moretti, providing concrete evidence of an enmeshed life. The investigation proceeded to her passport. The document was not unused. It contained numerous entry stamps from Italy, Milano, Roma, and Fensi from the past year. These markers corresponded to dates for which the subject possessed no memory, further cementing the timeline of her amnesia. Digital forensics on her laptop revealed a history of deleted appointments, including doctor visits, dress fittings, and wedding planning spreadsheets. This digital footprint provided irrefutable validation of the central truth. A 2-year span of her life was experientially missing. After a 20-minute drive, the subject arrived unannounced at the residence of another associate, Lauren, demanding information with notable aggression. Rejecting attempts at placation, she insisted on an immediate and complete disclosure, signaling a transition from a passive to an active role. The associate described the truth as complicated before recounting the incident from 6 weeks prior. She stated the subject's vehicle was deliberately forced from the road in a rural area approximately 2 hours from the city, reframing the event as a targeted assault rather than an accident. The associate's voice reportedly cracked as she explained the assault was premeditated by enemies of Giovanni's organization. The vehicle rolled 3 times, and a discovery was not made for almost 1 hour. This revelation of targeted violence caused a delayed shock response in the subject. How severe? The trauma was profound. Cranial, multiple fractures, internal hemorrhaging. You were airlifted and placed in a medically induced coma to manage cerebral swelling. Her expression faltered. We considered the possibility you wouldn't regain consciousness. Giovanni kept a 2-week vigil at your side. No sleep, no absence, just holding your hand, waiting. Yet I awoke. Correct. After 14 days. Upon waking, the last 2 years of your memory were absent. Your timeline had regressed by 2 years. No recollection of Giovanni, the marriage, nothing. The neurologist diagnosed it as retrograde amnesia, a known sequela of traumatic brain injury. And the consensus was that deception was the best course. It wasn't deception. Lauren began to pace. The doctor warned that forcing memory recall could inflict greater psychological trauma. He advised that a natural reconstruction of your bond might facilitate a non-traumatic return of memory. So, Giovanni, your parents, Megan, and I all consented to let you form the attachment again, free from the pressure of recollection. That's pathological. It was a survival protocol. She confronted me. Olivia, you were near death. Your husband was psychologically shattered. Our actions were protective. The term husband landed like a kinetic impact. I have no knowledge of him. You did, and you do, the version of you pre-accident. She loved him above all else. But I'm no longer her, correct? Lauren stepped closer. You formed an attachment to him again. In a matter of weeks, the same bond, the same neurochemical reaction. That must be significant. Before I could object, her doorbell sounded. She glanced at her phone, her color draining. It's my mother and father. You notified them? They had a right to know you had deduced the situation. My parents came in, their faces masks of measured worry. My mother came to me instantly, drawing me into an embrace I could not reciprocate. My dear girl, we are deeply sorry. We debated telling you every single day. So why did you refrain? My father sat on the sofa, looking more aged than I had ever observed. Because the alternative outcome was worse. Seeing you awaken to a 2-year void, to a marriage you couldn't recall, to the fact that there was an attempt on your life. How does one integrate that data all at once? So instead, you let me believe I was experiencing a psychotic break. No. My mother clutched my hands. We were trying to provide a space for you to heal, to remember organically, by using deceit, by shielding you in the only manner we understood. I pulled back from her. I need the medical documentation, all of it now. My father took out his phone, sending a cascade of files to my inbox. Hospital intake forms, cerebral scans, neurological evaluations, all documenting Olivia Parker's admission 6 weeks ago for a severe traumatic brain injury and subsequent amnesia. The data was incontrovertible, yet data and acceptance are two different phenomena. I have to speak with Giovanni, I stated at last. Sweetheart, perhaps you should wait. No, I must confer with him immediately. My mother gave a reluctant nod. I'll phone him. He was there inside 15 minutes, likely waiting in the vicinity, ready for this debriefing. As he entered Lauren's apartment, the agony carved into his face caused a constriction in my chest. Olivia, he said just my name. Can we have a private discussion? Lauren's bedroom was the sole option. We took positions on opposite sides, the bed forming a neutral zone between us. Give me the full account, I ordered from the start. No fabrications, no redactions, the complete file. Giovanni braced himself against the wall as if standing unaided was too great an expenditure of energy. Our first encounter was 2 years ago, at an art exhibit. You were showing your pieces? I was attending with Franco for business, but I saw your photographs and was captivated. When we met, I understood you were a pivotal event in my life. What is your profession, the real one? I manage an enterprise. Import and export is the public-facing entity. Beneath that, we have operations that function in ethical gray zones. Some are extra-legal, others just morally ambiguous. He looked me in the eye. I am not a moral man, Olivia, but I have attempted to be a better one since I met you. You're saying my husband is a criminal? I am saying you married a man who loved you enough to grant you a choice. I disclosed my nature after 3 months. I revealed everything. I anticipated you would leave. His tone lowered. You remained. What was my rationale? You perceived the person I was striving to be beyond my actions. You had a belief in rehabilitation. You returned my affection with equal intensity. He moved from the wall. Our wedding was 6 months ago. A small affair, only relations and intimate friends. You had white roses. You said they evoked the first snow. The specifics triggered something vestigial. White roses. Snow. A memory fragment too fleeting to hold. The incident, I said. My responsibility. I should have assigned a security detail. I should have insisted you refuse that commission. But your enthusiasm for the landscape project was immense, and I found you impossible to deny. Self-recrimination colored his every word. Our rivals leveraged it. They surveilled you. They waited for a moment of vulnerability. They ran you off the road. Who? Competitors. They have been neutralized. The finality in his voice was absolute, and you concluded deceit was preferable to disclosure. The neurologist was unequivocal. Dr. Reynolds, he stated that forcing traumatic recall could lead to permanent psychic injury and that allowing a natural return through familiar stimuli was the least harmful approach. Giovanni folded his arms. So, we replicated our initial meeting, our first outings. We offered you an opportunity to develop an attachment without the burden of expectation. But an attachment did form. The confession was painful. To a person who is a construct, I am not a construct. He drew nearer. Every interaction was authentic. The sole variable was your lack of historical context, but the bond, the effective response, that was genuine. How can I be sure? How can I discern reality when everyone has been playing a part? Because you feel it. He took my hand. I did not resist. Your somatic memory functions even when your cognitive memory fails. The way you react to my presence, your laughter at my humor, the look you give me when you believe I'm unobserved. That is not a performance. That is data. I wanted to refute him, to remain angry. But there, his hand holding mine, a warmth moving up my arm, I could not negate the connection. I could not deny that my body's cells recognized him, though my conscious awareness was a void. I require time, I said softly. Take all the time you need. He let go of my hand, a clear act of reluctance. I will wait. For any duration, even if the memories never resurface, even if you determine this is not your choice, I will wait. What if I am not her, the woman you wedded? You are her. Memory is not the sole determinant of identity. You're still Olivia, still a woman who finds aesthetics in tempests, who cycles through 5 languages under stress, who consumes ice cream from the carton after midnight. A melancholy smile appeared. Still the woman I value above my own existence. I departed from Lauren's apartment by myself. I declined all offers of transverse. I needed to ambulate, to reflect, to integrate this impossible new reality that I had a past life to which I had no access. My phone vibrated as I neared my residence. An unidentified number. I took the call. Miss Parker, this is... I maintained a position on the bed's far perimeter. A continent away, though mere inches separated us. Before sunrise, he draped a blanket on me and placed water on the nightstand. It was how somatic programming dictates movement, while the cognitive functions are still disoriented. We were both navigating attachment without a protocol. Dr. Reynolds, your family requested I make contact. I wish to arrange a consultation to review your recovery. Recovery, as if I were a damaged specimen. Perhaps I was. Tomorrow, I consented. I will be there tomorrow. In isolation, the subject examined photographic evidence of a past she could not access. This confrontation with a radiant but unknown version of herself, displaying affection for an unknown male, induced profound cognitive dissonance and confirmed a state of dissociative amnesia. Nothing surfaced. Only the enduring feeling that I had misplaced something essential that was irretrievable. Dr. Reynolds's practice was on the highest floor of a medical complex I had no memory of visiting, yet it registered as familiar. Glass exteriors with a view of the city. Contemporary decor in calming, neutral tones. A receptionist addressed me by name prior to my introduction. Miss Parker, Dr. Reynolds is ready for you. You may go in. The neurologist was more youthful than I had anticipated, perhaps 45, with compassionate eyes and wire-framed spectacles. He rose as I came in, offering his hand. Olivia, I am very pleased you decided to meet with me. You're the physician who prescribed the supplements. It was a statement. Yes, post-viral immune therapy was the official narrative we established with your family. He indicated a chair. The actual prescription was for neurological support compounds to facilitate recovery from a traumatic brain injury. I sat, my legs feeling unstable. Everyone persists in using that term, traumatic brain injury, as if its clinical repetition will somehow lessen the devastation of the diagnosis. Do you have a preferred nomenclature? I would prefer the unvarnished facts, the entire file. No more cautious redactions or clinical euphemisms. He accessed files on his computer, angling the screen toward me. Cerebral scans appeared. My brain, before and after the incident. Images displaying damage I could not decipher but knew was significant. 6 weeks ago, you experienced severe cranial trauma when your car left the roadway. The resulting impact produced a subdural hematoma, cerebral edema, and numerous contusions on the frontal and temporal lobes. His finger indicated locations on the display. We initiated a pharmacological coma to mitigate the intracranial pressure. Your period of unconsciousness lasted 14 days, and upon my reawakening, I presented with retrograde amnesia, covering a span of roughly 2 years. All antecedent memories were intact. All subsequent memories were erased. I examined the images. My brain, injured, altered. The selection of a 2-year time frame is clinically significant. Traumatic amnesia does not adhere to a predictable chronology. The cerebral trauma impacted regions crucial for memory encoding and recall. This specific duration likely demarcates the period of most intense neural activity for recent, long-term memory formation. Regarding prognosis, Dr. Reynolds paused, carefully formulating his response. A partial retrieval of memory is statistically more probable than total restoration. Episodic fragments may surface, with effective memories frequently preceding declarative ones, though a full prognosis remains unassured. Abrupt disclosure would risk iatrogenic psychological damage. Confronting a subject with such a profound mnemonic void, particularly concerning a marital bond, can precipitate major depressive episodes or even dissociative states. Our methodology favored gradual re-exposure, as clinical data supports experiential relearning over cognitive flooding. The patient's interpretation was deception. The clinician's was therapeutic intervention. Our objective was to safeguard her psychic equilibrium during neurological recovery. This protocol, validated in analogous cases, facilitates organic emotional development without the pressure of recall, which can act as a catalyst for memory restoration. And in the event of failure, the intervention still yields a reestablished emotional bond with her spouse, creating a new baseline for their relationship. The session was interrupted by an abrupt entry. The patient's parents and Giovanni appeared, their presence suggesting coordinated observation. The mother exhibited signs of recent emotional distress. The mother initiated, confirming the patient's request for her complete medical file. The patient's demand was absolute. All hospital data, the incident report, and records of all choices made during her period of incapacitation. Her father produced extensive documentation stating it contained every diagnostic, consultation, and deliberation concerning her treatment. The patient accepted the files, displaying mild tremors. Giovanni maintained his position by the doorway, a calculated distance that belied his internal conflict. She then directly addressed him, demanding a complete account of the incident. He approached but kept to a strict boundary of personal space, commencing his narrative of her return from a photography assignment 2 hours from Chicago. He recounted a meeting with Franco and his operatives regarding an escalating territorial conflict. The opposing faction was identified as Russian, who sought control of his shipping channels. His refusal to comply resulted in retaliatory action directed at his spouse. A clear physiological stress response, mandibular clenching, was observed. The opposition had conducted weeks of surveillance, identifying her schedule and moments of vulnerability. The method of attack was a tactical vehicle intercept, cornering her car before a lateral impact. Her vehicle breached a guardrail, descended an embankment, and rolled 3 times. He exhibited a brief blepharospasm, indicating involuntary recall of the event. Discovery was delayed by 47 minutes, causing significant exsanguination from internal trauma. The mother vocalized her distress. The father offered physical support. The patient was airlifted to Northwestern Memorial for immediate surgery on a hematoma, followed by intensive care. Giovanni displayed clenched fists, a physical manifestation of aggression. He reported arriving during the surgery and maintaining a constant vigil for 2 weeks until she regained consciousness. The perpetrators, he stated, were no longer a concern, a definitive statement implying their neutralization. Dr. Reynolds then described the patient's post-coma state as confused and disoriented, noting her first inquiry was for her sister. When her family arrived, she presented with a clear 2-year mnemonic gap, referencing past events as current. She exhibited no recognition of Giovanni and showed agitation when confronted with the temporal discrepancy. Subsequent cognitive evaluations confirmed a circumscribed retrograde amnesia, specifically erasing all memories of her relationship with Giovanni, a total mnemonic void. The patient inquired about her specific verbal response to him. Giovanni's vocal tone became strained as he recounted her questioning his identity as a stranger. Her reaction to the marital disclosure was panic, followed by accusations of manipulation. His facial expression registered significant emotional pain. The father then noted this prompted specialist consultations. The consensus among consulting neurologists and trauma experts was that coercive memory retrieval posed a significant risk of psychological harm. The patient termed the resulting strategy an elaborate deception. The mother reframed this as a recreation of her life, detailing how they reinstated her previous living and working conditions. The subject felt they had engineered a second courtship. "We merely provided the opportunity," Giovanni countered quietly. "The emotional response was your own." Dr. Reynolds then offered all medical documentation for her review, encouraging independent consultation and thereby affirming the clinical integrity of the process. He affirmed his confidence in their chosen protocol. The patient then requested to see the residence she supposedly shared with Giovanni. He corrected her qualifier, stating it was unequivocally their home. The drive lasted 30 minutes, a silent transition through changing socioeconomic landscapes from urban core to exclusive estates. The residence was secured behind automated gates. Its architecture, a blend of stone and glass, was surrounded by immaculately maintained grounds. The interior was disorienting, a space that felt alien yet was curated to her specific aesthetic preferences. Ubiquitous photographic evidence depicted their shared life. The images documented a life she could not access. He revealed her office, a space of her own design, containing evidence of significant professional development. The primary bedroom, however, proved to be the most potent psychological stressor, with its clear indicators of shared intimacy and commingled belongings. Every detail pointed to a shared existence. He then produced a leather-bound journal, identifying it as her personal record of their relationship. Examination of a random entry dated 8 months prior revealed her own handwriting, describing a weekend trip to Napa, replete with details of affectionate behavior. The entry detailed a conversation where she articulated her love for him, rooted in a feeling of being profoundly understood and unconditionally accepted. The text became obscured by tears as the patient processed the emotional state of her past self, a self defined by a certainty she no longer possessed. She vocalized her dissociation from this past identity. Giovanni's voice fractured with emotion as he apologized, framing the event as a failure of his protection due to the dangers of his world. She observed him, the man she was redeveloping feelings for, now revealed as her husband and the architect of her therapeutic deception. She confessed her inability to embody her former self. He absolved her of this obligation. To her concerns about the permanence of the amnesia, he proposed constructing a new shared history. He reaffirmed his commitment to wait indefinitely, reinforcing his role as the patient, devoted partner. Despite her assertion of unfairness, he framed his devotion as the sole moral act of his life. She closed the journal, perceiving the environment not as a home, but as a museum of a lost identity. She requested time for cognitive processing. He conceded, granting her sole occupancy of the house. Her inquiry into his destination was met with a reference to his multiple properties. He framed his departure as necessary to avoid influencing her decision-making. Alone, she navigated the curated environment, attempting to stimulate mnemonic recovery through sensory exploration without success. In the bathroom, she located the prescribed supplements, the tool used to ensure her compliance under the guise of post-viral care. She disposed of them, a symbolic rejection of the deception. Contact from her sister, Megan, prompted a verbalization of her profound psychological disorientation. The sister acknowledged the questionable ethics and offered an apology. Despite understanding the protective intent, the emotional pain persisted. When questioned about her feelings for Giovanni, she affirmed them. Her attachment was rooted in somatic responses, a physiological familiarity that superseded cognitive recall. This paradoxical bond was the primary source of her confusion. Her sister suggested this present emotion was the salient fact. The focus was shifted from lost memories to present emotions. In the shared bed, the patient sought mnemonic triggers through olfactory cues from his pillow, attempting to force the recall of a single memory related to their courtship or marriage. The effort yielded no results, only a profound sense of loss for an intangible past. Yet a deeper sensation emerged, not a memory, but an intuitive feeling of correctness, as if a subconscious part of her psyche recognized the bond. This became her provisional anchor. The subsequent week was spent in isolation and therapy. She engaged with her journal as if it were a case file and continued her failed attempts at sensory-based memory recall. On the 5th day, her sister arrived in a state of acute emotional distress, repeatedly vocalizing profound remorse for her complicity in the entire affair. The subject reported significant distress over the deception, including nightly crying due to her inability to resolve the induced confusion. Full disclosure occurred over a meal, initiated by a description of Giovanni's desperate, grief-stricken hospital call for aid. The group, in consultation with Dr. Reynolds, had determined a gradual reintegration protocol was safest. Her sister admitted to rehearsing deceptions to achieve authenticity, insisting the group's intent was not manipulation, but protection. Their stated goal was preventing a total psychological collapse. The subject acknowledged this, differentiating cognition from forgiveness while pursuing both. Anger yielded to shared sorrow. Questioned about Giovanni, she noted a persistent somatic attachment despite cognitive amnesia. Lauren's visit followed. Lauren presented previously unseen photo albums, chronicling the subject's life and her relationship with Giovanni. These images provided a careful timeline of their bond's development. Lauren noted she observed the subject's initial choice of Giovanni, a decision made with full awareness of his environment. The subject's initial state was described as one of fearless certainty in her love. Lauren then observed a recurrence of this same pattern. When the subject voiced fear of permanent amnesia, Lauren reframed it as a rare opportunity to consciously choose her partner twice. This cognitive reframing proved highly therapeutic. Giovanni adhered to her request for distance, maintaining contact via non-demanding texts that signaled his patient availability. On day 8, the subject initiated contact, requesting full disclosure. His arrival within 20 minutes suggests he anticipated her call. Reintegration began at an intimate restaurant. He ordered for them both from habit, a familiar pattern from their shared past, which she accepted. During the meal, he recounted their history, starting with their first meeting at a gallery 2 years prior. He described an immediate sense of profound change and an approach met with unexpected curiosity. Their initial conversation extended for 4 hours, driven by mutual engagement. The subject inquired about the disclosure of his criminal enterprise. This occurred 3 months in, at a secure location, where he presented evidence, expecting her to terminate contact. He then initiated physical contact. He reported she stayed, focusing on his potential for change over his past actions. They then proceeded to the church of their wedding. Giovanni recounted details of the ceremony, her floral adornment, her vows that elicited an emotional response from him, and her promise of steadfastness through adversity. He confirmed her steadfastness, even after a violent attempt on her life. In that location, the subject experienced a somatic echo, a residual emotion her body had stored, which she articulated as something beyond memory. This admission triggered a hopeful response from Giovanni. He relayed Dr. Reynolds' prognosis: emotional recall preceding episodic memory. The subject rejected the clinical analysis, requesting his presence in the moment. In the church, she ceased efforts at cognitive recall, yielding instead to the process of somatic memory. The next site was a rooftop bar previously visited post-amnesia. Giovanni guided her to a specific spot, recalling a shared memory from a thunderstorm the previous year. He described her photographing lightning, framing it as a conflict between the city and the sky. He stood behind her, recounting her first declaration of love at that spot during the storm. The stimulus triggered a powerful abreaction, a moment of intense déjà vu. For an instant, she experienced full sensory recall: the rain, the thunder, and the emotional certainty of that past moment. The memory fragment then receded before it could be fully integrated. The subject expressed frustration, but Giovanni reframed the fleeting recollection as significant progress. He affirmed his commitment to the process, which continued over subsequent days at various locations. These sites included the botanical garden of his proposal and their honeymoon beach in Michigan. Each stimulus elicited emotional echoes and brief flashes that lacked context. Dr. Reynolds later confirmed this pattern, explaining the primacy of emotional memory recall over episodic. The doctor cited damage to the hippocampus while noting the amygdala's integrity, explaining why affect was recalled before events. Prognosis for full episodic recovery was uncertain, but the validity of emotional recall was stressed. The subject then decided to return to their shared home. The decision was instinctual, a feeling she could not articulate. Giovanni had been residing separately to grant her space. The pronounced relief in his voice validated her choice. He offered to remain apart, but she insisted he return to what she now termed our house. She affirmed their joint ownership. During a parental visit, her mother reacted emotionally to the couple's effortless kitchen dynamic, a procedural memory persisting despite amnesia. Her father corroborated her previous state of extreme happiness, noting he was witnessing its recurrence. He framed this second, choosing not as coincidence, but as an essential truth. The subject also began a slow process of rebuilding trust with Megan. This involved reviewing video files that documented her life with Giovanni at social events, on vacation, and in daily routines. The video subject displayed frequent laughter and constant physical contact, her gaze one of deep dependency. The subject observed her past happiness, Megan described it as a state of completeness. Questioned if this was recoverable, Megan suggested it was already reforming. 3 weeks post-disclosure, the couple prepared breakfast. During this routine, she commented on her affinity for rain, a preference he confirmed as long-standing. In this moment of domestic normalcy, the subject reached a cognitive breakthrough. While memories were absent, the emotional attachment was present and real. She addressed Giovanni. He turned from the stove. She declared her love, stating the words felt authentic. She articulated that she could not recall the initial bonding, but was experiencing the process anew, which she valued more. His reaction was abrupt. He dropped a utensil, approached, and with trembling hands asked her to repeat it. She repeated the declaration, emphasizing it was a present choice, not a remembered feeling. The subsequent kiss was described as a dual experience of return and beginning. They would construct a new shared history, integrating memory fragments as they emerged. The subject theorized this process was superior to simple recovery, that a second, conscious choice held more significance. While rain fell, they built their future from an inaccessible past she no longer required. Her current reality had exceeded all prior expectations. 3 months post-disclosure, a period of worldview reformation had elapsed. Therapy with Dr. Reynolds focused on navigating a reality with inaccessible memories and ungrieved losses. Minor memory fragments had begun to surface. Olfactory stimuli, like cedar, could trigger recognition of Giovanni's cologne. Auditory cues prompted procedural memories of dancing, though without episodic context. These were emotional echoes, not concrete recollections. Dr. Reynolds noted the brain's compensatory abilities. He explained its ability to form new neural pathways for emotional connections. The subject analogized this as building upon an unseen foundation, which Dr. Reynolds confirmed remains supportive. She resumed her photography career, now with the focus on deliberate documentation. Her work became a visual archive of their life, an effort to prevent future memory loss. Giovanni was now a frequent subject in moments of domesticity. He observed that he had become her subject, to which she replied that he was her preferred one. Conversations about their future, which she inferred, were echoes of past discussions, now felt novel. Topics included children and travel to unremembered destinations. The house felt more like home. Professionally, Giovanni's organization required documentation for its legitimate operations. The subject's latent professional skills began to reemerge, unwittingly serving the perpetrator's interests. The pivotal psychological event occurred precisely 3 months after a third party, Lauren, revealed the deception. Triggered by an atmospheric stimulus the subject subconsciously welcomed. On a veranda, amidst a storm, the perpetrator leveraged the environmental trigger to foster intimacy. The subject articulated a deeply held preference for the weather, to which he replied, "I know," reinforcing his manufactured role as the keeper of her identity. When questioned, the perpetrator confessed to 2 years of methodical surveillance, pathologically reframing his stalking as romantic study. He presented the recent gaslighting as a second courtship, a narcissistic distortion of his systematic manipulation of the subject. The subject exhibited classic symptoms of traumatic bonding, initiating physical contact and verbalizing affection. She rationalized her capitulation as a conscious, authentic choice, a defense mechanism to legitimize her emotional connection to her manipulator. The perpetrator required verbal reinforcement of his control, which the subject provided, accepting the life he constructed. Physical intimacy, synchronized with the storm, sealed this psychological contract. His suggestion to go inside was a minor test of compliance. The subject resisted, desiring to cement the moment in her memory. In the storm, she fixated on sensory details, his appearance, his gaze, in an effort to create a new, authentic memory. believing this event represented an undeniable truth. In a secure setting, the perpetrator broached the topic of procreation. The subject confirmed this was a previously discussed desire, linking her to a past she couldn't recall. She now consented to this future, demonstrating a further consolidation of the reconstructed bond. The subject's relief signaled the high value he placed on her reproductive compliance. Therapeutic intervention continued over the subsequent months, facilitating partial memory recovery and further entrenching the new timeline. Fragmentary memories of the wedding and travel returned, indicating a slow, non-linear neurological healing process. The subject's professional life flourished, with her work now a conscious product of her reintegrated identity. Giovanni provided consistent positive reinforcement for her professional endeavors. 6 months after the storm event, they mutually agreed to attempt conception, a step focused on future creation over past reconstruction. A positive test, 3 months later, initiated the next phase. The subject verbalized the reality of the pregnancy, a mixture of joy and terror. The perpetrator normalized her ambivalent response as a standard human emotional state. This occurred 12 months after the initial revelation that shattered and rebuilt her world. In her study, the subject reviewed a chronological photographic album of her life with the perpetrator. Certain images elicited familiarity, while others remained voids. Giovanni appeared, inquiring about her well-being as she gestured toward the developing fetus. A female fetus had been confirmed the previous week. Her emotional response was positive, but disconnected from any specific recalled desire. He directed her to a photograph, testing her memory of a specific event where she appeared happy. She admitted no memory of the event, but acknowledged the displayed emotion. He corrected her tense from past to present, reinforcing a continuous state of happiness. The subject has accepted that severe trauma may render parts of her history permanently inaccessible. The subject closed the album and requested Giovanni recount their initial meeting. He sought clarification, the first, authentic encounter, or the second, staged one. She requested both, allowing him to narrate both the historical facts and the recent manipulation. He recounted stories of the life she had lived, but could not fully access, reinforcing his central role in both her past and present. The onset of rain, a recurring environmental trigger, began to fall, mirroring the subject's own psychological transformation. Observing the storm, the subject reflected on her various identities. She expressed gratitude for his methodology, framing his deception and delayed revelation as a positive act that allowed her to fall in love again, validating his manipulation as a gift. The subject presented her repeated choice of him as a rare gift, cementing her rationalization of the trauma. He placed his hand over hers on her abdomen, a gesture of ownership over her and their progeny. He thanked her for her compliance. His gratitude was for her choosing him twice, and her bravery in loving him without memory. The subject denied the role of memory, instead claiming an instinctual core recognition of him. This statement signifies the final and complete success of his psychological campaign. As the rain fell, they planned a future built upon this foundation of manipulated history and fragmented memory. Their daughter would arrive in 6 months, born into a dynamic defined by the perpetrator's control and the subject's Stockholm-like devotion. While specific memories of their courtship may be permanently lost, the subject now focuses on conscious, present moment building. This shift in focus is a coping mechanism that prioritizes her current, constructed reality over an irretrievable past. The father figure displayed overt emotion during video calls, indicating his ongoing investment in the narrative. The support network, including Megan and Lauren, continued to provide structured, gentle reinforcement of the subject's new reality and recovery.